Hi everyone, thank you for inviting me to share my work with you. Since the theme of the exhibition upstairs is Let Me Be a Mirror, I thought I should talk a little bit about my work in relationship to this theme. So the mirror frames and reflects the viewer, and in my work, the viewer is always framed at the center of the experience. I want to talk a little bit about some of my recent projects and then share some strategies I use for inviting the viewer to step onto the center stage and to participate in my work in a way that is playful, creative, and active. So if you haven't had a chance to see Ideogenetic Machine, allow me to describe it briefly. It's an interactive installation which takes your portrait and translates it into a line drawing. And then it embeds your portrait into a code-generated comic book. So the camera captures your portrait and then turns it into a line drawing. All the other panels you see are filled with drawings I've been adding to since 2011. At the end of each interactive episode, you can email the comic book to yourself. I use a face tracking algorithm to insert these blank speech bubbles, so later you can feel free to write your own narrative. One of my goals is always to bring out this sense of exuberance in the audience. I think, in a way, we're all at the center of our own universe. We're the hero of our own narratives. And I want people to feel intuitively that they too are in the center of the universe of this artwork. So basically, the work is incomplete without them. As an artist, I find that the unpredictability of human behavior adds a lot of surprise and aesthetic risk. So as an artist, I never have to get bored because people are so unpredictable. So since this is a festival about art and technology, I thought maybe I should focus more on the use of technology in my work. But then again, technology is always just a means to an end for me. It's about using whatever tools that's available to create a rich interactive experience for the audience. So this is a comic that was made by the machine. I saw this when I was exhibiting Ideogenetic Machine in Belgium in 2012. This is a Ghent altarpiece by Jan van Eyck. And the parallel struck me. So I was thinking about how Ideogenetic Machine really explores a lot of interest with early Renaissance altarpiece. So this is the back panel. At the bottom, you can see the patrons who paid for the artwork, the husband and wife. They're painted the same size as the saints, and they're very richly colored. So I like to think of Ideogenetic Machine as being very similar, even though art using digital technology is a very young form. Artists might have been exploring the same issues very far back into history. So the project upstairs is also about portraiture, but maybe in a more democratic form, where it's referring to a popular art form that might be thought of by some as being lowbrow. And you also don't have to have a bag of gold in order to become the hero of this really important story. So it's also a drawing project for me. The drawings you see here are from a database I've been adding to since 2011. They're there to prompt the viewer's performance. So it's also a way for me to arrange my drawings in a non-sequential way. Hopefully, they're juxtaposed together in interesting ways, which allow me to see themes in my own work that I might not have been aware of before. In 2013, I was invited to show this project at the Centre Pompidou. I collaborated with an independent comic book collective from mainland China. And it was really exciting to use the system I created and see how people who are real comic book artists would use it. And this is some of the works they created. I think for comic book artists where every detail on the page is so crucial in the story you tell, it was very challenging for them to think about working in this very loose way where you don't have any claim over the final outcome. So I think the work I created while doing these kind of temporary interactive projects, actually the things I learned translates really well into permanent public art. The viewer is always something I'm really interested in, and one of the things I really enjoyed about being in Savannah is discovering all the wonderful public space you have here. I think public space is really precious, and as an artist, we have to approach it with a lot of sensitivity. So thinking about the viewer so much and how they would behave in a space and act given particular parameters, I think really helps me think about making permanent public art. So this is a project that's commissioned by the University of California, Los Angeles, and Westfield for a new shopping center which opened last September. Those of you who are not from LA probably don't know this, but we once did have a really great electric trolley system that was very extensive, the most extensive in the world. It's called the Pacific Electric and affectionately known as Red Car. So the shopping center is located very close to one of the terminal stations on the line. If any of you have watched Who Framed Roger Rabbit, one of the important subplots is the dismantling of our great public transportation system. So here the detective tells these children, who needs a car in LA? We have the best public transportation system in the whole country. So it was taken apart for many different reasons, but partly people thought that freeways were a great solution to congestion. So this piece is all about LA's relationship to public transportation, because spending so much time in the private space of our cars has a really big impact on our lives. So the irony is that this piece is commissioned to be mounted in front of the multi-story car park, because everyone comes to the shopping center in their cars. So it's meant to evoke a model train kit. I'm not sure if any of you have ever played them, where you lovingly break off the parts and glue it together into a complete train. So all of my work has been interactive so far, but this one is static mainly because of its permanent nature. But I want people to be able to look at it and mentally assemble the trains. Someone has suggested to me that these little chairs in the design are really important because they suggest a kind of public space that we're really missing in LA. So I like to think of this piece as being fairly optimistic. Because of the form of the sculpture, you can imagine how something that's been dismantled can be put back together again. So all of my work is very site-specific. This piece is site-specific in terms of its history, but also in terms of the space. It's shaped by the flow of people. So the denser details are placed closer to the bottom where you can see it better. It doesn't block your view as you travel up and down the escalators. Also, it's almost two-dimensional, but not quite, in order to provide some interest, but also to work with the architecture. So public space has always been a big interest of mine. This is Archipelago, which was commissioned by the 2010 01 festival. These are desert islands which traveled around the city, and they contained glass bottles, sand, paper, and pen. We asked the people we encountered to write a message in a bottle, and imagine casting it into this metaphorical ocean, which ended up being the internet, where we published the message that they wrote. So I was really surprised by the things people wrote. They were really profound, funny, and a lot of it was very vulnerable. So like Red Car, this piece is about how urban infrastructure impacts our urban experience. And let me show. So this is how. Is that too loud? start. Okay. So this project was commissioned by the Children's Museum of Pittsburgh in an artist's residency where artists are commissioned to create artworks for young children. I wanted to share it with you because it's a really good example, I think, in approaching how to create interactive art. I find it's best not to start a project with a preconceived idea of how the audience will behave. In the first day that I was at the residency, the staff took us around the building mainly just to show us how violently all the displays were subject to also the children climbing on them and shaking them, kicking them. So it was really important to create something that's safe and robust, but also really inviting for such a young audience. I built a lot of prototypes and took it to the floor for playtesting and learned a lot of really valuable things. For example, I had imagined that the children would put the ball in one end and patiently wait for it to come out the other end and then start the process again. And I realized quickly that no child will ever do that. So it had to be designed in a way where they could intervene at any point and repeat the parts that they really like. So you might have noticed that play is a really important part of my work. I think of it as this pretty universal language which creates a lot of accessibility in the work. Okay, just to quickly show a really early project designed for the Milan Public Design Festival. So here, I worked with a group of really talented tailors, and we set up this booth on the streets of Milan where we copied the clothes worn by the passersby in the color of the day. We were there for a week, and each day we had a different colored fabric. So here are some of the copies we made. So this is a fuchsia day. This is a pink day. This is a yellow day. We copied exactly the style and the cut. So I want to use this piece to illustrate the fact that I really love inviting the viewer to become part of my work, but I'm also conscious of the fact that everyone is an individual. Everyone has a different history and a different relationship to art. So I wanted them to be able to preserve their individuality, but also be part of the work. This is another really early project I did in 2008. So you can use your hands to cast these shadow puppets on a projected moon, which was shown on the Santa Monica Pier. So it has this amazing backdrop of sky and ocean. So again, I was thinking about accessibility. Anyone who has ever stuck their hand in front of a light source and made a shadow puppet should be able to interact with this piece in some way. I was also thinking about the different attentional levels that people are willing to give you in public space. There's some people who want to play with the piece for a really long time, and other people who are happy to be a spectator. So how do you interact with the piece as an individual, but also perform for others? And I think it's interesting to have these different levels to make sure there's something for everyone. So this is landscape abbreviated. What you're looking at is a maze which is controlled by a piece of maze generation algorithm. So the installation is constantly creating new pathways for the viewer to walk through. That's actually the curator of the show. So I wanted everyone's spatial experience of the maze to be literally different, the way that everyone can make a unique comic book. So it was commissioned for Wave Hell, which is a really beautiful public garden in the Bronx, which also has a really great contemporary art program. It's real moss. I gathered it from around the neighborhood in New York. So it turns out that the design of mazes can be represented in math, which means it can be represented in software. So I'm really interested in this idea of exploring qualities unique to software, but in physical space. By adding more modules and changing a few variables in the code, you should be able to expand the maze infinitely. So this is another project which borrows from the power of childhood fantasies. I think everyone can have a relationship to the maze. It's a compelling symbol we find in cinema, in literature, and in video games. So that's why I was really interested in exploring it, because everyone can have a relationship to it. Was that the running out of time? Oh, okay. So I have a few more minutes to show you my last project, where I took 8 different chess variants and I redesigned the shapes of the pieces so they tell you how it moves on the board. So here's chess. The shape of the pieces tells you whether it steps or ranges, whether it moves diagonally or orthogonally. Some of you might not know, but the Western chess that we're familiar with today is only one of the variants that evolved from the ancient Indian game of Chaturanga, which is about 1,600 years old. And in a lot of countries in Asia and Africa, there is a chess variant. So I took 8 games that included Western chess, Chinese chess, Korean chess, Japanese chess, Thai chess, and Mongolian chess, and redesigned them. So this is Japanese chess. You have to be able to read the characters in order to play it. And this is my redesigned version. So a lot of my work is about facilitating communication and breaking down language barriers. My fantasy here is that you will be able to, if you learn the sculptural system I've invented, then you can play a game of Chinese chess on the streets of Tokyo, maybe with someone who only knows how to play Japanese chess. This is the first time I exhibited the work. We had a 4-hour tournament in the gallery where everyone had to play all the different variants. Yeah, so thank you for letting me present.